Warning: this episode contains details that some listeners may find disturbing. You can't have a murder mystery without the murder. That's a quote from today's guest, Brian Brady, an author whose second book, Hiding in Plain Sight, is loosely inspired by a real case, a case of abduction and murder. And Brian was directly involved with its investigation, and he's going to share how they caught a killer. This is a study of strange. Welcome back, listeners. I'm Michael May. Now, as a show that dabbles in true crime, as a true crime consumer myself, I'm often left wondering about the real investigators behind cases. What are they really seeing as opposed to how we, the public, hear about the testimonies and comments and read on blogs about the case? What little details are detectives catching that help them solve these cases? Now, I had a great conversation with Brian Brady about this and his books. First, if you're a lover of all things weird and strange and mysterious, subscribe to A Study of Strange wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, here's my interview with Brian Brady.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm very appreciative of your time. I first started talking to try to schedule you on about 2 months ago, and then the holidays showed up, and then we had a lot of wildfires, as I'm sure you're well aware here in LA. So thanks for bearing with me. And again, I appreciate that you were being on. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background in law enforcement and also security?
Sure. I started with Berkeley Police Department, spent 9 years there and left as a sergeant and went to East LA to Baldwin Park, which is a city of about 85,000 in East LA. Stayed there for almost 2 years. I was a lieutenant with them. Mm-hmm. And I applied for and got a captain's position with Farmington, New Mexico, and moved to New Mexico for 4 years. And then applied for a captain's position again back in the Bay Area with Novato, which is about 30 miles north of San Francisco, city of about 60,000. And ultimately became police chief there and retired in 2003. Then I was afforded the opportunity to interview for the security director at Universal Studios and got that job. And then that morphed. GE bought the studio and then Comcast. And we merged with NBC, so we became NBC Universal. And ultimately, I ended up as the vice president and deputy chief security officer for them. Did 10 years there, came back home to the Bay Area, and spent a year at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, putting the security systems in for the new museum. And then once that was open, I left there. And since then, I've been doing some consulting work and writing.
Great. And you're from the Bay Area, and just historically, there's been a lot of, I'll say, very public and well-known sort of true crime and cases from the area. Did that have an influence on you growing up there?
Yeah, I was born and raised in the city, and I have a number of friends on the police department there. As a matter of fact, that was my first choice for law enforcement. But when I applied, San Francisco was only going to take 2040 vision corrected to 2020. Mine was 2050 corrected to 2020. The state standard was 2070, but San Francisco, for whatever reason, still had this archaic 2040. So I didn't qualify. So I went to Berkeley. Long story short, a lot of my friends on the department over there influenced, and I have a number of friends that worked homicide. So as a consequence, I was privy to a lot of the cases you're talking about where I got to be a fly on the wall. They would let me come over there when I worked homicide in Berkeley and spend time with them. It was a great learning experience for me because I got to spend time with the best.
You transitioned into writing, and was there one moment that hit you that, I want to do this, or did the writing influence gradually come upon you?
Kind of gradually. What I did do over the course of my career, I had kind of kept a folder of little interesting anecdotes and stories and things that had come up. And we'd be with friends at an event or having dinner or whatever. And you'd be talking about something, someone asks a question, and the response usually was, you should write this. You should write this down. This is really interesting. And I kind of, put it in the back burner. And then when I had a little time, I started, just piecing it together, taking um, characters, people that I'd met over the years, and creating composite people. My investigators are composites of people I know and people I've met. And the cases are based loosely on real events, and
Hmm.
then a little editorial license to embellish them a bit, because uh, in law enforcement, as an investigator, your writing is, I guess, the best word would be technical writing.
Right.
And what you tend to do is you want to be as brief as possible, as succinct as possible. So as you work a case, you get the information, but brevity is important. Ultimately, the case is going to be reviewed by the district attorney, et cetera. If you're going to go to trial, you can't write a novel because they're not going to have the time to read it all. So now you're switching gears and going from an abbreviated writing style to a very elaborate, embellished kind of writing style. And so you take this story and these investigative steps that are, basically bullet points in a report, and now they have to become a chapter. And I think that was the hardest transition, was to be um, the descriptive narrative. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and sometimes you start to write it and you start to think, God, this is too flowery, too this really doesn't fit. It was a dark and stormy night, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so eventually, I hope you hit kind of a middle ground where it's it's accurate. I want the stories to be technically accurate, but entertaining. So you want to find that middle road.
Right. And that's a lot of what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of correct and what can happen in sort of the tropes of television and narrative and stories and novels. And even someone that, my show doesn't always cover true crime, but it does a little bit. And I've worked on documentary film projects that involve true crime. And I'm always fascinated how people like myself that develop content around this genre, we don't necessarily have a great perspective of what really happens on the ground, and we miss things. And on the internet, where people love to talk about these cases, it becomes an echo chamber and little ideas bounce around until you talk to someone who was actually there, and they can usually like cut through all that and get right to the point.
It's true. I mean,
Yeah.
the television shows, some are better than others.
Hmm.
They But they're limited because they've got to take a case and solve it in 43 minutes with commercial breaks. And
Exactly. Yeah.
and it just doesn't work that way. These are time consuming, tedious investigations. That there's steps you have to take, interviews you have to do, and some of them, they seem meaningless, they seem mundane, and yet if you don't cross all the T's and dot all the I's, you're going to miss something. And
Right.
it's that third house from the end of the block that on the second day of the neighborhood canvas, that somebody's home and says, "Oh yeah, I remember. I did see a car out in front of their house that night." And all of a sudden, in one case that I worked on, a woman said, "Yeah, there was a car with they're very strange fellows, and they just didn't seem to fit." And so, well, could you tell us about the car? I said, "Well, I wrote the license number down." House, I'm like, if you hadn't talked to her, and that was on that particular case, it was a kidnapping. That was the break on the case. That was the
Yeah.
right car. And here's this nice little old lady who just wrote it on her calendar because it didn't look right. So
Right.
the and then you get a little better on some of the episodic. Uh,
Hmm.
and I like Michael Connelly as an author.
Hmm.
I think Connelly does a really good job. Great descriptive narrative. He paints a great picture. So good that when the series came out, when Bosch came on TV, and Titus Wellinger became Bosch, that wasn't Bosch. That was I had in my mind's eye what Harry Bosch looked like from the books, and it
Right.
wasn't
Right.
him. But now there's nobody else. It has to
Right.
be him. He's really made the role come to life. But Conley does a great, and Conley is a technically accurate writer. He's a
Oh,
crime
that's good to
reporter.
hear.
He's got great connections with LAPD and LA sheriffs. He's a super nice guy. I've had occasion to meet him once. Really nice man and great writer. I thoroughly enjoy his stuff. But he is technically accurate and he paints a great picture.
I would love to dive into your second book, Hiding in Plain Sight, real quick, because I know that you've already even mentioned that your books have been loosely based on true cases. And I'd love to talk about Hiding in Plain Sight. Do you mind giving us like a short synopsis of the book and then telling us about the true case or what you're allowed to actually say about it?
The case of the book, it's about a young girl who is at a parochial school in North Beach in San Francisco. And I get to, write about that mainly because I went to parochial school in San Francisco, not in North Beach, but I have friends who went there. And as a matter of fact, after the first book, a good friend of mine who worked with me in Los Angeles, he's a former fire chief, and he chided me on the first book saying there weren't enough firefighters in the book. Uh, there weren't enough Italians. That was the other thing he said. So the second book, in deference to him, was in North Beach, which is a heavily Italian neighborhood in San Francisco. Old neighborhood and very close knit. So the book, she is the daughter of a firefighter, and she ultimately is kidnapped and sexually assaulted and murdered. And when you write about that, people who have read the book, they say, I really enjoyed the book, but it was so dark in the beginning. I said, well, you can't write a murder mystery without the murder.
Yeah.
And I don't dwell on the murder, and I don't put a whole lot of gory detail. I don't think that solves anything. And I want the book to transition to the investigation and the investigators, the characters. So that's the gist of the story. She's kidnapped, she's murdered, and they start the investigation. Of course, you now have the police and firefighter working together because
Mhm.
they're family for us. We want to solve this for this firefighter. And the fact that she's going to a Catholic school, you now have the Archdiocese in San Francisco putting pressure on the police chief to get this case solved immediately. So I kind of want to include in that this is part of what goes on. This is some of the politics that does happen. And the fact that is this murderer a serial killer? Of course, there's nothing sexier than a serial killer. The media loves that. And even if
Mhm.
they can't, even if it's not a serial killer, if they can even allude to it, that increases your readership. So that's kind of the way the story evolves, and the bad guy in the story is clever, and he ultimately makes a single mistake, which one of the investigators catches, and that is ultimately the demise of the bad guy.
Mhm.
In real life, 13-year-old girl kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered, and that's all true. It's in a suburb of San Francisco, and the killer in the real case is not a serial killer. He gets caught probably on the first time he's ever done anything like that. Hope and never did it again, obviously. But that part was different, and the young girl in the original case wasn't the daughter of a public servant or anything. She was just a kid in the neighborhood who, unfortunately, came across this guy and ultimately was murdered. So, and the case itself, it garnered attention because it happened at the same time as about four other girls who had gone missing or
Oh,
had
wow.
been murdered in the Bay Area. So the press, they're tying them all, regardless of the fact that they're 100 miles apart.
Right.
It's becoming the serial killer is being created,
Mhm.
uh, when in fact that's not what happened. But we did get a lot of assistance because of that from other entities, and I mentioned in this case talking to you that the FBI being one, they normally don't get involved in a local homicide. It's really
Mhm.
outside their jurisdiction. But in this case, they had a missing and exploited children's division bureau. And because of these other girls, ours fit. And whether it was a true fit or part of the SAC, the special agent in charge in San Francisco, who we worked with, and the supervising agent in Marin County, they made it fit, and they got us the resources. And the bureau was they were wonderful. They provided us with manpower. They provided us with, and we were able to ultimately resolve the case. And it was resolved ultimately by one officer paying attention. Again, small things. The suspect in this case, the responsible party, when he murdered the young girl, he put her in a trash bag and then dumped the body on the side of the road. The trash bag, he was a custodian at a church, actually.
Hmm.
And in the bottom of the trash bag that he didn't notice when he put the body in there and threw it away was a little coloring book. Okay, so one of the officers noticed the book and said, this is really similar to a book my kids see at my church. So we got a hold of the publisher, and we found out that the book was similar, not identical, but it was only had gone to a certain number of churches in the Bay Area. So we started again. This is
Going each
the
one. Yeah.
backpedaling. Ultimately, we came across one church who was on her path, and went to that location, interviewed people, got one guy who wasn't going to work. We ultimately got a search warrant. We found where there was blood that he tried to get rid of by dumping coffee on a carpet, but
Hmm.
you can't get rid of blood. So
Yeah.
anyway, long story short, the Bureau and Marin County Sheriff's, because this was a Novato case, and the Marin County Sheriff's, the body was actually dumped in the county. And
Hmm.
normally the rule of thumb is wherever the body is, that's the agency, that's the lead agency. But we'd already started the missing persons case.
Yeah.
And the sheriff basically said, this is your case. We'll assist you. So it was really a joint investigation with Novato PD and Marin County Sheriffs, and then the FBI. Uh, and the three agencies work seamlessly together. And sometimes there's a clash with the local law enforcement and the FBI, so
Sure.
occasionally, and usually that's ego on somebody's part.
Yeah.
In this case, I have to say that the bureau they were great. The agents who work out of the Marin County office, they were, and we all knew them. We've worked other cases with them. They live in town. We know who they are. They were super. They made the case. And again, the investigative tools that they have at their disposal, the lab work that they can do, uh, where sometimes a piece of evidence gets into queue locally at the local lab, even at the state lab, and it's a homicide, so they'll push it. But
Right.
sometimes being able to have it flown on an FBI jet to Quantico and get number one position at the lab back there, that doesn't happen that often.
That's very helpful. So it sounds like this case came down to one piece of evidence, which I think you said, that
Mhm.
coloring book, and then good old fashioned, knocking on doors investigation.
Yeah, it was. And then when we identified, we narrowed the suspect down.
Hmm.
Then it was a really good interview by a really good detective, and we had the FBI polygrapher. Again, they loaned us their number one polygrapher, and
Right.
he came in and on a polygraph. A polygraph is basically a series of yes and no answers, and it's pretty simple. It's the pretest where all the real important questions are asked. Because once you're on the machine, you don't allow people to elaborate because that makes everything skewed. You just get yes and no's.
Right. So the pretest, just for someone like myself who doesn't really know, is that to establish a baseline?
That's part of it. And the other
Okay.
part is you're asking questions. If you're a good polygrapher, you're also a good investigator.
Hmm.
And some of your questions that you're asking ahead of time to prep, you're setting the stage.
Got it.
And you do the pretest where I'll say to you, I want you to tell me a lie on the first question I'm going to ask you. Is your name John Smith? I want you to tell me yes, it is. So I'll get that read and then tell me something truthful. So you'll get the baseline.
Hmm.
But in this case, the polygrapher did the initial interviews. He walked out of the room and said, "That's your guy." Hmm.
Wow.
I haven't
Wow.
even hooked him with the machine yet, you know. And
Yeah.
then our investigator went and talked with him, and the guy eventually. I mean, not didn't take very long. He was distraught about what he had done. And he was very, very remorseful about what he had done. I'm not excusing what he did,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he was beside himself over the whole thing. Matter of fact, it's a capital case, and he wanted to plead guilty to the death penalty
Wow.
at one point. So, which you can't do, but nonetheless, he was at that point. He felt he should be punished.
Right. And so probably a difficult question to answer. Well, maybe not, but do you think that this guy could have become a serial killer or a multi-time killer? Do you think that there could have been victims
No,
again in the future?
was it based on my limited knowledge of serial killers?
Mm,
Uh, I would say probably not because of the level of remorse that he had. Most of the serial killers, and again, I've only been around a few, don't they're not remorseful, and they'll keep killing until they get caught or something horrible
yeah,
happens to them,
yeah, that's right.
uh, and they're not they don't I guess they don't want to get caught. They want to continue. This guy, once he was caught, he wanted it over. He literally wanted, put me in the gas chamber. I'm done. I deserve to be punished. So he wouldn't fit the mold of a typical serial killer.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to hear. So, I mentioned earlier about sort of the echo chamber of the true crime world and content and blogs and people that love to follow these cases, specifically more unsolved cases. Like that tends to be because that's intriguing. So, like you were saying, the newspapers love serial killers. What do you sell more books if it even mentions it? But in terms of that world, what are people missing that are just sort of followers on Reddit and blogs and podcasts like mine? What are they missing from the experience of real investigators that are on the ground?
Well, one, I think we mentioned just earlier about
Mhm.
speed. Uh, because of shows like CSI and again, I think it's a good show. As a matter of
Yeah,
fact,
absolutely. Yeah.
the original CSI used to shoot on our lot at Universal. So they were there every day. You would see them. They're really nice people, and
Yeah.
the set they had was really well done.
Mhm.
But you don't get a hair or a blood spot and put it on a slide and send it off to the lab and get a phone call 5 minutes later saying, "Oh, it's John Smith." It doesn't work that way. It takes sometimes weeks or months. And the other thing is, just because you have a DNA sample doesn't mean it's going to come back to anybody. The person has to have their DNA on file,
Right.
or that DNA sample is basically useless. And that's another thing. Once, as soon as somebody gets a DNA sample, oh, case solved. Well, no, not necessarily. Um, and there are people out there. For instance, in the case I'm talking about, DNA wouldn't have mattered. He'd never been arrested.
Right.
So there was no. He had no sample on file. The breaking point on that was that because of her being dead, we had her DNA. Then we could match that with the murder weapon, etc. So it was her DNA, not his, that made the difference.
Right. Right. And yeah, and you see, a lot of I'm thinking very generally, so I'm trying to think of a specific example, but generally speaking, with unsolved cases, whether they're old, new, whatever, but you'll find people that say, "Oh, well, that person's guilty," and they'll sort of, in a biased way, pick out who they think is the top suspect, and you'll hear people complain of like, "Why don't the police just arrest that person?" And it's like, why don't they do that?
Well, we're that easy.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
Arresting somebody is relatively easy. Making it stick, that's a whole nother ballgame. And you have issues where you have jeopardy. You don't want to go jump the gun and take somebody to trial on a case you're going to lose, because if it's the right person and you don't do it right and they're acquitted, you don't get another. As the lawyers
That's
like to
it.
say, you don't get a second
Yeah.
bite at that apple. It's over.
Hmm.
So you want to be sure you've got your case, right, and that you have the right person. And not frequently, I guess, oft times, you know, it looks like it's this person. Evidence points, the speculation says it's not that person. It takes, you
Right.
start looking, and again, it's turning over all around. In this case that I made reference to, we had a witness come forward and say they saw the young girl get on a bus. Okay, that was important. What bus? What time? So for us, that meant, and again, this is one of the things where the FBI helped us with personnel,
Mhm.
finding that bus driver, and then stopping that bus at that bus stop at that time, and then interviewing every person on the bus that could have seen her get on or get off the bus, then interviewing every person an hour either side of the bus arriving at the bus stop, then interviewing every home and business on that street, and it was a busy street. Uh, that was incredibly time consuming and completely wrong. She never got on the bus, but this person was absolutely convinced that that was her that got on the bus.
Right.
So, sometimes eyewitness doesn't work either.
Hmm.
Uh, but we spent probably 2 full days, and probably, if you figure eight, that's 16 hours. And we probably had about 48 people working on that thing for that project. You figure the man hours that went into that, that we could have been doing something else, but we couldn't ignore it either.
Absolutely. So you're currently working on a third book, is that
Yes.
correct?
As a matter of fact, I just got a note back from the publisher that they're working on the cover. So
Oh,
we're
nice.
trying to decide what the cover is going to look like right now.
Oh,
But the
I
book
love it.
itself is with the publisher, and hopefully,
Yeah.
once we pick a cover, it'll be out after that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Is that one also based on a true story of any kind?
Uh,
And not that you have to
it's
share it, I'm
actually
just
no,
curious.
no, it's fine. It's
Yeah.
actually based on probably two or three stories.
Perfect. That's great.
They come together, and it's a little bit different than the first. Same team of investigators,
Mhm,
uh,
mhm.
but a little bit different because this one's going to start in Europe and work its way back to San Francisco. Uh, and,
Nice.
and I love writing. I mean, I love writing about San Francisco. It's home. That makes it
Mhm.
pretty easy. And because of friends, you have to write it really accurate because they grew up there too. And if you have the street going the wrong direction, you can't have two north-south streets that intersect. You better do your homework and be sure it's right. And the other good thing about San Francisco for me is that there are so many people, whether they've never been to San Francisco, but because of TV and movies, they know San Francisco. They recognize landmarks. So you better get it right. It needs to flow. People need to
That's
be able
right.
to look at it and identify with it. So in this book, it starts elsewhere, but it comes back to the city, and then it starts out dealing with the work of art forgery. And my wife is a graphic designer, and she's pretty familiar with the art world. So she was very, very instrumental in cluing me as to how you forge art, and a little research we had to do on that, and then bring that back and attach it to a homicide.
I love it. Being someone that, lives and works around the entertainment industry in Los Angeles, it's a sequel that's now grown in budget and size. You're now going overseas. You gotta travel around. I love
Yeah.
it.
Well, yeah. Well, if you know somebody that wants to do it, tell me,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
can. And then I want to be Michael Conley.
Yeah.
I want my own TV show. Actually, oh, he's got two of them. He's got Lincoln Lawyer too.
Oh,
Um,
that's right. Yeah, on
those are
Netflix.
all comedy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, he's
That's
the he's. But again, he's good. He does a good job. And the Lincoln Lawyer is
yes.
fun. That's a good series.
It is a good series. My wife and I watched that. I can't get her to watch a lot of investigation things. My wife only wants to watch either sci-fi or half-hour comedies, and so we have to sort of do this tug of rope to figure out what we're watching. But she will watch The Lincoln Lawyer, and it's been very good.
And
Um,
my wife is good up to the point something gruesome happens, and that's over.
exactly. Yeah. Same with mine. Same with mine. So if you could go back to any of the like famous San Francisco or Bay Area unsolved cases to do anything different, who or what would that be?
I think the most famous has to be Zodiac.
Oh, it has to be. Yeah, I would
You know,
think so. Yeah.
uh, and I know that several of the people who worked on that case. And I'll preface that by saying, when I was in Berkeley, uh, a good friend of mine, we grew up on the same block in San Francisco. He's older, and he was homicide. And I asked him, I said, "Can I come over on my days off, and just hang out? Be a fly on the wall." And they graciously allowed me to do so. So
Mhm.
I got to sit in on interviews. I got to watch them. I got to go to crime scenes. All the,
Wow.
you know, and you just don't get to do that normally. And we handled 12, 14 homicides in Berkeley in a year. San Francisco at that time was doing 100. So these guys were, seasoned investigators and really, really good at what they did. So I got to be on the periphery as they worked, these various cases. And Dave Toschi, who was the lead investigator on
Yeah.
that, Jack Clary,
Legendary Dave
Hal Zahn,
Tashi, yeah.
all these really, these names that come up as they're legends
Mhm.
in San Francisco. And, they did a great job. The problem with Zodiac was, at least looking back on it, there were multiple agencies involved. There was a Vallejo case, there was a Napa case, there was San Francisco. And back in the day, we didn't have the communications that we have today. You didn't have the social media, shall we say. You didn't
Yeah.
have the computer networks that we have today. You didn't have the databases that we have. So you had 3 or 4 separate investigations working where it would have been great to get everybody together and put all the information into one database and then go from there. And I think that was one of the things that probably hurt that case. And it wasn't that anyone did anything wrong. The technology just wasn't there that we have today. So I think that probably, as it evolved, that probably frustrated them because uh, I know there were some things that happened up in Napa and Vallejo that SF said, God, if I'd have known that on when we were doing this,
Right.
I would have gone in a slightly different direction. So
Y
those are,
yeah.
but I do think it was probably the technology that slowed them down, not lack of effort.
For sure, for sure, and that's what it seems like to me as well. I haven't covered that case in anything I've worked on, only because it's almost too well known, and I try to find things that aren't as well known, but that's, so covered and done in
And there's
a
there's
million different
10,
ways.
there's 10 suspects out there, and
Absolutely.
everybody who writes about it or whatever has
That's their
a
favorite.
trail that
Yeah.
leads to that one person. And uh, like I said, there's 10 different suspects. So
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everyone who wrote about it's convinced theirs is the guy, but not enough yet.
Not enough yet. So on that note, Brian, thank you so much for doing this. I would love to find out where people can find your books and anything like that you may wanna share here.
Sure. The first book is called "Oh, What a Tangled Web," and the second book is "Hiding in Plain Sight," and the third book was going to be called "Greed." And they'll all be on Amazon, Amazon Kindle, Barnes and Noble. I think Target carries them now.
Mhm.
So that's primarily online. And then Copperfields, which is a local bookstore up here, great store. It's an old fashioned, honest to God bookstore. And so the books are there as well, which is kind of cool. Uh, Bookstores are great. I love bookstores.
Oh, me too, me too.
Uh, so it's kind of fun to see your book in the store. That's all.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Well,
but
that's fantastic, and I'll provide some links in the show notes for everybody to make it easy as well.
and then I've got also there's a website. It's called GoldenGateTales.com, and there's a forum there. If someone wants to ask a question or something, I'd be more than happy to try and answer it.
Fantastic. Do you have any advice for people that are trying to get into writing as well?
I'll try and keep it short. There are people out there. You can write your book, and you're convinced that at the end that you've written War and Peace. This is the greatest thing that's ever going to be done, and get a good editor first, and trust the editor, because you're going to find out that the first 25 pages of this masterpiece that you send, they're going to send you back 26 pages of corrections, and the first time that happens, it's devastating. I mean, it's like, oh my God, what have they done to me? And then once you take a breath and realize that they're really helping you, and when you put their suggestions in, it really does read better, or it does sound better. One. Two, find a legitimate publisher. There are hundreds of fly by night publishing, and I subscribed to one and lost money with them. And you find out in this particular case, the company wasn't even in the United States; it's in Pakistan, so they're
Right, right.
judgment proof. You can't sue them. Uh,
Mhm.
and once they have the money, they're gone. So do your due diligence. If it's ABC Publishing and they're in California or Ohio or whatever, just go online, look up the Secretary of State and see if that business is registered with the Secretary of State as a business. If they're not, check Better Business Bureau. If they're not, stay the hell away. These people are going to take your money, and they're not going to publish your book. So find a legitimate publisher, do your homework. And I'm not trying to plug it. My books are with a company called Palmetto, and
Mhm.
they're out of South Carolina. And I talked to them going into this thing saying, I've got burned, and I was very careful, but they've lived up to what they said they're going to do. So you find a good, legitimate publisher and do your homework. Just do your homework. And good editor and a legitimate publisher. And Amazon, if you want to do it, Amazon self-publishing is cheap. The drawback is you become one of 1 million
One of 1 million, exactly. Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
And how do you get your book to the front of the queue so that when somebody goes to Amazon, yours is the book that pops up?
Hmm.
Well, you can do that. And Amazon has a system to do that, but it's very expensive. And you have to have 3 published books with them before they'll even talk to you about advertising. Uh,
Oh,
so,
interesting. Yeah.
so it's, and I've talked to the authors who use self-publishing now. They were started with big publishing houses and then went to their self-publishing, but they brought with them to self-publishing a base of following. So they already had 50,000
Yeah.
or 100,000 people reading their books. Well, that's great. When you self-publish, those people are looking for your book, and you have a website, you put out a blast that your book is coming out. Well, you have people lined up to buy it. Then self-publishing is fantastic.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
without the advertising, self-publishing, you just fall in, you become a little fish in a big pond.
Yeah, sage advice for anybody creating content, not just writing. This day and age, there's a lot of different ways to self distribute all sorts of things, and if you are working with publishers or distributors for anything, definitely do your homework. It may take a little extra work to check on people, but you should do it, and you will find out the truth. So that's great advice. Well, thank you again, Brian, for taking the
Thanks for having me.
time.
It was fun.
And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to A Study of Strange, and a special thank you again to Brian Brady for being a guest on the show. As usual, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and check out our website, astudyofstrange.com, where you can find out more information and subscribe for special things through our Substack, which you'll find on the support tab on that site. Until next time, thank you, and good night.